welcome to Raw Deal, the channel where we talk about how to lead a wholesome, healthy, energetic, and otherwise great life. Today we're going to discuss a topic that I personally find important, and the reason I find it important is that on the blogs, on YouTube, amongst the various channels of people who are into meditation, self-development, and various techniques that help you cope with your mind, cleanse your mind, and just improve your mind in general. There are widespread what I would call Holly wars. Holly wars amongst on the topic which technique is better. And today I would like to discuss several techniques which I've personally tried, and I'm going to share whatever I've gathered from my experience and give you a bit of an overview of how they work, because there is a common overarching theme that unites all of those techniques. And really, as you will see, the difference is just in the details. They all have the same goals and the same direction in mind. And what's going to work better for you is really dependent on your individuality, because we're all quite different. The world is very multifaceted, and so are humans in it. So it's incorrect to think that one technique is going to work for everyone. It might, but it will still work better for some than others. And we can optimize by just either mixing the techniques or using one technique at a given time and then perhaps switching to another technique and so on. So what are these techniques? Well, the techniques are the holotropic breathwork. It's famous in narrow circles, but it's also become famous in not so narrow circles. Invented by Stanislav Grof, a Czech psychiatrist who lived and worked in the United States for a long time, pretty much for his entire life. Another technique is Vipassana or Vipassana technique. I'm going to discuss the one that's taught by Goenka, or actually it's not taught by him anymore because he's dead, but it's taught in the centers that sprung up all over the world based on his technique. And I'm also going to discuss Hatha yoga. Yes, correct, you heard it correctly. That's just the yoga that perhaps you could have encountered in a yoga studio if they were teaching it right. That's a subject for a whole other video of what it means to teach the yoga right, because the way yoga is taught in the West, it's not really yoga, it's just some, I don't know, gymnastics or something like that. And I will just discuss as the fourth general meditations. So something akin to following the breath, perhaps something along the lines of Zen meditation, Zen Buddhist meditation. So, and you will see, we'll overview these, and you will see what they have in common, how they work, why they work, and perhaps you will gather an understanding of how to select one, or in which situation to select one or the other. So let's start with the holotropic breathwork. What happens in the holotropic breathwork is that we combine breath and music. So they're also evocative body movements, right? So in a sense, we combine body movements and some work with the mind, because by breathing in a certain way and listening to the music in a certain way, we enter in altered or inordinary, as Stanislav Grof likes to say, inordinary states of mind, of consciousness, and we perform work on our own mind. So in a sense, that's like a surgery we perform on ourselves, and these inordinary states of consciousness is what allows us to do that. Now, to really appreciate the whole beauty of how the holotropic breathwork works, and also how all of these methods works, we need to consider something called the mind-body phenomenon. Unfortunately, in the English, there's only one word for mind, and it's really confusing. For example, in Russian, we have at least several words, at least two that I know pretty easily, that we can use to describe two different types of mind. So one mind is let's say the thinking mind, right? In the English, you might call it like the monkey mind. So you have to always qualify what it is that you mean. And then there is the mind as in the whole thing, the whole unity, right? So in Japanese, there is a word, kokoro. So that means like the kind of the heart. But I've also heard that some people interpret it to mean your entire being, as in the mind that's contained in every cell, the consciousness that's contained in every aspect of your being. So these are kind of two separate things. So there is the big mind, and then there is the small mind. So the mind-body phenomenon refers to your small mind and the body, right? So what we mean, your small mind has the following stratification. So there are three components to it. There's the kind of subconscious, that's the level that's attached to your body, right? So those are the nerves, the endings, the things that are directly responsible. They work, let's say in the computer jargon, they work at the hardware level. Then there's the subconscious that's a bit higher. That's where, you know, some things might be stored, like the programs or certain patterns or the way we react. And then, of course, there is the consciousness. Those are that's the layer at which we operate on a day-to-day basis. So probably right now, the conscious me realizes I am making this video, I am speaking right now, and so on. Whereas the previous two layers, they're still running on the background. In fact, I'm kind of building upon them, and that's how I'm able to function. So you have to understand these three layers. So that's our mind. And what's important to understand is that the body itself is connected to the mind via the lowest subconscious level. So this is like the animalistic type of mind. So this is where the mind and body come together. And this is the connection via which they're able to influence each other. So we can think certain thoughts and our body will change. So if our thoughts are depressing, we will slouch and we will have a pretty terrible posture. On the other hand, if we're pretty happy in the mind, then all of a sudden our body becomes jubilant. You know, we may wave our hands or exhibit some other emotions, love, sadness, happiness, and so on. So this is like a two-way phenomenon. The mind influences the body, but the body also influences the mind. So this is important to understand, because to affect one, you can do it via the thing itself, or you can do it via the opposite side of it. So to affect the mind, you can use the body, and to affect the body, you can use the mind, and so on. So this is crucial to understand, because each one of these techniques, as I mentioned it, is gonna essentially be based on that very phenomenon. So let's get back to the holotropic breathwork after this quick aside. So in the holotropic breathwork, we do both mind work and body work. We first enter the state of consciousness via music, via certain breath. It's essentially like a mild form of hyperventilation. And then we experience certain experiences. Each person's experience is completely different. It's different each time you do this session. So it's an entirely new thing. So what happens during these altered or inordinary states of consciousness, is that from my personal experience, the way I perceive it is that the depth between your conscious layer and your subconscious layer shrinks. So imagine if you had some landscape and there are some peaks and valleys and so on. And then in the typical day, you had this whole thing filled with water and you could see nothing but the layer of water, right? And by entering these altered or inordinary states of consciousness, you essentially shrink, you dry up this layer of water, so some peaks and valleys become visible. And these peaks and valleys are the things in your subconscious that are like low-hanging fruit. They're emotionally charged things that now become available for work that can be done on them. So that's precisely what happens. So by entering into this state, your mind, essentially, in the holotropic breathwork tradition, they call it the inner healer, right? That sort of indicates that they're using the, how should we put it, like a holistic medicine type thing, where they say, okay, in the holistic medicine, we say our physical body knows how to heal itself, we just need to get out of the way. The same principle is applied in the holotropic breathwork. So our mind-body complex already knows how to heal itself. We just enter into this state and get out of the way, let it do its journey, and then we'll integrate it as we come out of this experience, in the coming days, weeks, and perhaps months, and so on. So that's roughly the phenomenon. So as we enter into the state, these emotionally charged phenomena or kind of patterns or programs become available, and the healing happens. Well, the question is, how did these programs get there in the first place? Well, in each tradition, these programs carry different name, right? So in the holotropic breathwork, in the transpersonal psychology of Stanislav Grof, this is called the condensed experience system. So something like that. I'm translating from Russian, so it sounds roughly like that in English. So these are the systems of condensed experience. So sometimes in the past, an experience happened with a person, and for one reason or another, a certain pattern got programmed into our brain. So let's give a quick example. A young child becomes scared, right? And as he gets scared or as she gets scared, perhaps a certain pattern got programmed. So in a certain situation, you have to do this. Maybe the shoulders kind of get shrugged up, they get lifted up, so there is tension in the muscles here. Maybe there is some other phenomena in the body. So for the rest of his or her life then, this is not going to just end when the child grows up. Once this pattern is entrenched, it's going to accompany the person. Because the reason it actually appears is because at the time, the person did not have enough consciousness to actually observe the situation from a side. They were fully living in the situation. And their body actually perceived this as a life and death matter. So essentially, that's why it got programmed, because the mind-body was trying to protect itself. So in a sense, that was like a survival instinct. These programs exist there because they were put there, perhaps improperly, but nonetheless for the goal of survival. So, and of course, you know, the grown-up person is not going to get scared from the same thing a child got scared from. So perhaps it's like a loud honking car, or maybe like a dog bark or something like that. But nonetheless, this will accompany them for the rest of their life, even though it's no longer needed. So things like holotropic breathwork and these other techniques are actually aimed at cleansing this stuff. So in the Vipassana tradition, this will be called sankaras, or I guess with a bit of an Indian pronunciation, the Pali pronunciation, they call it shankaras. So in Sanskrit, it's sankara, samkara. In the yoga, it's the same thing. So essentially, these are impurities in the mind, and these are the things that do not belong there because they're impermanent. So these are things that come and go, whereas your permanent side, the true I, the thing you really want to get acquainted with, is hiding behind them. So most people lead their life essentially associating themselves with these phenomena, with these kind of tricks the mind-body complex plays on them, because so many of them got entrenched in their minds, and nothing ever gets cleaned. So, well, the way we clean it is actually, we say in the holotropic breathwork, we enter this state, then our mind-body itself picks what we're going to work on today. And by living through this phenomenon, the person may actually experience pain. The pain will be real. You know, they might ask the person who is kind of helping them, the so-called sitter. They might ask them to, you know, press against their body or help them, or perhaps help them stretch or something like that. And as that happens, so the person on both layers is working with the body because they're moving. So if you've ever been in a room where holotropic breathwork session is happening, you will see that people exhibit some weird, really strange looking body movements. But as they do it, they are working through some issues. And at the same time, as those motions happen, their minds are experiencing things that need to accompany that, right? So that's roughly the idea of the holotropic breathwork. So we experience on the mind side and we experience on the body side. So if you imagine an analog, suppose we have a piece of cloth, like some kind of a rag that we're washing the floor with. So if we twist this rag, there are two ends to the rag. And to really, if we want to squeeze all the water out of it, to do it the best way, the most efficient way, we have to be squeezing it from both ends. So we kind of want to twist it, right? So this is the mind here, this is the body here. So we're twisting it from both ends, and these impurities come out, and that's the most efficient way. Of course, you know, we can hold this one end steady and just twist and work with the one end, and things will come out, but perhaps it might take a little longer. So as you will see, some of the techniques actually do it just that way. Holotropic breathwork uses music and uses specific breathwork to actually achieve the twisting of the both ends. Now, let's move to the Vipassana technique. So Vipassana technique, roughly, the way it works is the person meditates. So the person sits for essentially a long time each day, for 12 hours, And for the first 3 days of each retreat, 3 days are spent to focus and sharpen the mind. So all distractions are eliminated. No calling, no reading, no writing, no cell phones, no talking even, no eye-to-eye communications, no gestures. So everything gets shut off so the mind can really free itself. And then the person follows his or her breath for essentially 12 or 13 or something hours a day. I can't remember exactly how many it is. I need to count. But so you follow the breath because we train the mind to really focus and start noticing small, tiny, subtle things that are completely unnoticeable or get hidden behind all of the distractions in the day-to-day life. Perhaps slight vibration, slight temperature change, the motion, say, of air as the breath comes in and out. Maybe some wind is kind of dangling your hairs and so on. So all these tiny things. So, and on the third and fourth day, we switch to something called observing the body, scanning the body technique. So we sit, we do the same thing, but we're scanning the body from the head to the toes, and we observe phenomena on the body, right? So what's the reason behind it? Well, the reason is that, as I said, your mind and your body are locked like this at the very deep subconscious level. It's the same thing. It's the two different aspects of the same phenomena. They're united. So by watching the body, we're essentially watching the mind. And as we sit, because our attention is so focused, we are so sharp in those days, the same thing happens. So your layer between your conscious and your subconscious kind of gets shallower and shallower and shallower. And in the same way, these peaks and valleys become more visible. So, and as they become more visible, they start manifesting themselves in a way that's impossible in the day-to-day life. So the person sits, they might get overcome with emotions, they might remember this really bitter situation they had in the childhood, they might work through some issues where they forgave their parents, and all kinds of issues. Some issues could be from purely kind of mental issues, which nonetheless will have imprints in the body. As I said, every mental issue, every thing that gets entrenched, that gets imprinted in your mind, will also have a representation in your body. So if the person got scared, like we discussed, then for sure they will have some body phenomena that accompanies that. In fact, sometimes that's the best way to troubleshoot that, because if the person has enough consciousness, they can just be mindful at every moment, follow their mind, just essentially observe it, and they will watch that phenomenon. They can actually watch it from a side like an independent observer, and that's we'll note later, because that's kind of what the Hatha yoga technique does. If you do it the right way, that will eliminate it. So just by watching it, if you're an independent observer and you watch the phenomenon happen, if you do it over and over again, each time it will get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. So this is a really beautiful thing. It's like if you have a puddle of water on the ground and the sun is shining on it. So just by watching it, so you're the sun, you have the focus, and just by watching the issue, by not getting caught up in it, the issue will become weaker and weaker and weaker until the puddle is no more. It's gone. It disappeared. There is a dry spot. So at that point, at least you have the freedom, perhaps not the complete freedom, but you have the freedom from that issue. Maybe you'll have many more to work through, but that particular one no longer bothers you. So you are completely, in Vipassana they would say you are equanimous about it, completely equanimous. So that no longer bothers you. It does not give you any kind of a fluctuation or kind of emotional states and so on. So, but very quickly, getting to the Vipassana, so by watching our body and the things that are associated with, we're essentially watching the mind. And by watching it and being equanimous and essentially not getting caught up, we invoke this effect, like I described with the sun drying up the puddle. We're essentially drying up, perhaps, let's say, the magnitude of that issue. And by watching it over and over again, if it manifests over and over, then we heal ourselves, so it becomes gone. So some issues are quite tiny, maybe 1 or 2 watch sessions like that, if they appear, it's gone. Some issues could be quite entrenched, so they will manifest themselves over and over again. But inevitably, completely inevitably, if you watch it over and over again, it will reduce in intensity first, and then over time it will subside. So people work through some amazingly complex things using this technique. So both on an emotional kind of psychological level, from, as I said, forgiving their parents, emotional things, kind of personal difficulties, self-confidence, self-esteem, to purely physical things. Like people will say, I got rid of neck pain that essentially plagued me for 10 years after that car accident. And what happens is they sit in the meditation, they're observing the body. So they observe that there is a pain in the neck. So and they watch it from a side. They're not getting too involved. They're not trying to avert that pain, and they're not trying to kind of attract something pleasant, right? So in the Vipassana technique, they call it cravings and aversions. So they're not trying to crave after something, and they're not trying to avert something. We're just staying calm and equanimous. I'm neither trying to get more of it, nor am I trying to push it away if I don't like it. And so by obtaining that, this is how you become that sun that's going to dry up that puddle. So essentially, that person is going to observe that pain, and your mind works in such a way that first, the pain will get bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more intense, because it says, hey, I don't like this. We should really be trying to avert that. Why aren't you doing that? So the pain will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you really try to stay equanimous, this is kind of a make it or break it point. There will become a point you need to realize that pain is completely temporary. It's a passing thing. It will come and go. I mean, at least when your body goes, the pain will go for sure. So I mean, I don't know how consoling that is, but usually it happens a lot quicker than that. But at least when your body goes, the pain will go as well. So if you watch it, it will intensify, and then there will come a moment where it subsides and eventually just disappears altogether. And when it does, most people report that it just never comes back. So they completely rid themselves of this phenomenon. So this was the quick summary of how Vipassana works. So let's look at the Hatha Yoga, because it's also very interesting. As I said, Hatha Yoga, the way it's taught in the West, it's a little weird because it's mostly like gymnastics. People go there for, I don't know, for stretching or something like that. And that's all good, but that's missing the whole point. So one of the things yoga achieves by working with the body is exactly that. It's twisting that rag on two levels. So the body level in this case is very obvious because we're doing asanas, we're taking these poses. We're placing our body in uncomfortable positions, and we're also stretching and kind of massaging and twisting things that typically don't get engaged in our day-to-day life. So when that happens, inevitably, we kind of touch upon those sitting knots and sitting programs that are sitting in our body. Like maybe if the child was scared and the person acquired this, right? So when we're doing some asanas on the shoulders or opening kind of the rib cage, the chest here, that gets affected. So all of a sudden, that gets affected. So one side of the rag starts being twisted. If at the same time, while doing these asanas, we stay conscious, we stay in our body, we remain in our body, we observe what happens in the mind, we observe what happens with the sensation on our body and so on. So in this respect, Vipassana and yoga, they're really doing the same thing. And I know Goenka Vipassana, they like to say, our technique is the only one, but I personally find it, and I mean, I love the technique, it really works. I use it myself, I go on retreats, I'm going to go on retreats again. But it's ridiculous to say that this is the only thing and this is the only thing that it works. I mean, it's probably good for beginners so they don't mix the technique, but once you really start seeing how it works, I hear that they especially enforce it for older students, but I think, the more experience you get with the technique, the more allowed you should be in mixing it. So I really don't understand that part, but that's a topic for a whole other video. So the point is the Hatha Yoga really does the same thing if we stay in our mind and in our body as we do these asanas. That's why it's important, right? Stay within. So perhaps close your eyes to kind of reduce that visual input, visual bandwidth that comes in. And by doing that, slowly, you will be twisting that rag, and slowly you will be working through things. Of course, there we hold them for, I don't know, I hold asanas for a long time, sometimes could be 10, 20 minutes. Typically, I don't know, in a yoga class could be a lot less. But over time, as the body gets more and more malleable, if we routinely stay with our mind and really stay conscious, stay mindful of the practice, the same effect will be achieved. So in this respect, yoga is actually doing the very same thing. It's twisting the two sides of the rag, the mind and the body. Now, let's get back to kind of regular meditation. So let's consider something like Zen Buddhism. So something where we just sit and watch our breath. And we breathe, and what's the technique there? Well, what's interesting is that Oftentimes, people report that they will work through mental issues using just, say, the Zen Buddhism. Well, how does it work there? Because clearly you're not moving your body, right? But actually the same thing happens, except maybe one side of the rag, the body side, is pretty still, and the other one gets twisted. As you sit more and more, inevitably you watch your mind more and more, you observe the phenomena that occurs, you observe the thoughts that occur, and if you remain equanimous, so in Zen, they will also tell you just watch it come and go. If it comes, let it come, but also let it go. You know, if you have a house, invite them in, but let them pass. Don't invite them for tea. Kind of let them come in and let them go. So don't attach. Don't get into this kind of a hamster running on the wheel with your thought process. Because before you know it, you start on one thought, and then 5 minutes later, you don't even know how you got there, right? And then you can kind of, in memory, you can backtrack. Oh, I was thinking that and that and that, and this is how I got where I am now. So you don't want to do that. But at the same time, if that ever happens, you know, you don't want to beat yourself over it. So just get back to the breath. So in those traditions, it's also possible, amazingly, you know, people will come there with pretty stiff kind of Western bodies, right? That, you know, the hips are not open, they can sit cross-legged. But over time, as they sit more and more, actually, just by watching the mind, their bodies become more malleable, right? And some things and locks and kind of painful things and these patterns in the body also get eliminated. So, friends, I've outlined pretty quickly these 4 methods, 4 techniques. As you can see, they're all using the same mechanism. The details are quite different. On the surface level, they may appear quite different. I know in particular there are a lot of holy wars between kind of the Holotropic Breathwork camp and the Vipassana camp. It's really the same thing. I mean, it's just how much time you can invest. I've done both. I've had tremendous experiences, tremendous effects from both of those. In fact, I could say that holotropic breathwork essentially brought me to Hatha yoga. So it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing synergy. So there is no good nor bad. It's, you know, the question that should be asked is good for whom, good for which situation, good for which time in life, and so on. So I highly recommend any of these techniques. Be careful, just read about them, understand your needs, perhaps watch what people say, make your opinion, try it out, and so on. All of those techniques, they have helped numerous people to kind of rid themselves of problems, right? What are the problems? I mean, these are literally things that could be anything. So like fear of women for men, it's a big thing. Fear of men for women, so it's another thing. Fear of insects, any kind of thing, any kind of phobia. Also, usually negative habits like smoking or drinking. So there is some kind of emotional situation that becomes a trigger. Then the person reaches for that cigarette, or emotional trigger, they reach for that shot glass or something. So all these things, all these techniques can successfully work with these kinds of patterns and actually cleanse your mind and twist that cloth, and eventually more and more impurities get eliminated. And as a result, the person will lead a happier, more harmonious, and just more enjoyable life. So, and by doing that, if we are more happy, more harmonious, and enjoying our life more, then inevitably we're going to be influencing the people around us. And actually, just by changing ourselves, we're going to change the world around us, and that's a really important thing. So the true change in the world does not start at the voting booth. It does not start, you know, wherever people think it starts. It starts here. You have to really sit down and start working on yourself. That's the only true lasting path to kind of happiness in the whole world. So I hope this video is useful for you. I hope you use it for good, and I hope it benefits you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in next videos soon.